Burbank, California. Summer of 1937. The sun was a pale disk over the San Fernando Valley, reflecting off the sheet metal roofs of Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. But inside the design office, the heat came not from the California sun but from the incandescent debates of men who saw the future of flight in very different ways. The Army Air Corps had just issued Specification X-608, an audacious and, to most, impossible request. An interceptor capable of 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, fast enough to overtake the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft and high enough to chase them across the skies of Europe. For many in the room, it was an engineering death sentence. For one young engineer, it was an invitation. Clarence Leonard Kelly Johnson, at just 27, was already known as brilliant, obsessive, and slightly eccentric. He had studied the flow of air like a poet studies rhythm, and for him, speed was not a luxury. It was a law of nature that could be obeyed, manipulated, and ultimately mastered. At his drafting table, he drew not the familiar single fuselage design that dominated fighter aircraft since World War I, but something the other engineers called MAD, a twin-boom configuration, engines mounted in the front, propellers counter-rotating to cancel torque, turbo superchargers to maintain sea-level horsepower in the thin air of high altitude, a machine that seemed to defy physics, and certainly conventional wisdom. "Kelly's lost his mind," muttered one senior engineer as he peered over Johnson's blueprints. "We're supposed to build an interceptor, not a science experiment." The executives, cautious men of accounting and risk assessment, were in near revolt. Every sketch Johnson presented made them sweat. The armament layout was unconventional, the twin-engine configuration unfamiliar, and the estimated weight pushed the limits of the latest Allison V-1710 engines. The project's cost projections threatened to consume the firm's resources. One executive leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke from a cigarette, and said flatly, "If we commit to this, we're betting the company on the delusions of a 27-year-old. Johnson did not blink. He had faith in the mathematics, in the aerodynamics he had spent sleepless nights calculating, in the long hours he had spent running wind tunnel tests on scale models. He believed in what no one else could yet see, that the XP-38, as the prototype would be designated, was not just a plane, it was a revolution in the making. By the fall of 1938, construction of the first prototype began in earnest. Skilled machinists and craftsmen, many of whom had never worked on a twin-engine fighter before, labored through night shifts. Aluminum sheets were riveted with precision, control surfaces fitted to tolerances smaller than a human hair, and every cable, hose, and rivet placed with a foresight that would become Johnson's hallmark. Engineers whispered among themselves about the aircraft's size and shape, a fuselage long and slender, twin booms extending like outstretched fingers, and a central nacelle that seemed almost pregnant with potential. It was ugly, they said. Ungainly. Impossible. But they were building it anyway. On the 27th of January 1939, the XP-38 finally left the ground at Muroc Dry Lake, California. Lieutenant Benjamin Scoville, the test pilot, gripped the controls as the engines roared to life. The twin Allison V-1710 engines, each pushing 1,000 horsepower, tore the aircraft down the lakebed at speeds that had previously been theoretical. As the lightning lifted into the air, it felt at once graceful and terrifying, a beast that responded instantly to control inputs but carried with it an unmistakable sense of latent power. At altitude, it climbed faster than any single-engine fighter in existence. In the thin winter air, the turbo superchargers kicked in, delivering full power to the propellers, which spun in counter-rotation, cancelling torque and giving the pilot unprecedented control. But it was not without danger. The XP-38 was twitchy in turns, sensitive to gusts, and prone to sudden role reversals. Compressibility issues had not yet been solved, and test pilots described moments of heart-stopping instability in dives, as if the aircraft itself were testing their courage. Every flight brought new data, but also new questions. Could this design survive combat? Could men fly it safely? The answers were uncertain, but the promise was undeniable. By May 1939, Johnson was ready to demonstrate the aircraft's true potential. He planned a record-setting transcontinental flight, a non-stop, straight-line dash from Burbank to Mitchell Field, New York, 2,400 miles of open sky. The purpose was simple: prove that the Lightning could operate at long range and high speed, qualities that would be essential for the Pacific and European theaters. On the morning of the flight, the XP-38's engines hummed with barely contained fury as it lifted from the runway. Observers held their breath. When it disappeared into the clouds, few believed it would arrive safely. It did, but not without drama. By the time the Lightning reached New York, the stresses of sustained high-speed flight had taken their toll. The landing at Mitchell Field was abrupt, rough, even violent. The aircraft skidded along the runway, the tires smoking, as ground crews rushed to prevent catastrophe. The XP-38 had survived, though battered. The pilot emerged shaken but exhilarated. Newspapers across the country heralded it as a triumph of American ingenuity. Johnson's mad idea had flown, and in doing so, it had rewritten the rules of what was possible in fighter design. Inside Lockheed, the mood was transformed. Skeptics became believers as the data confirmed what Johnson had always known. The twin-engine layout offered unmatched stability. Turbo supercharging gave power at altitudes previously unattainable, and the counter-rotating props neutralized torque, creating an aircraft that could outclimb, outrun, and outshoot almost anything in existence. The XP-38 was not just a plane, it was a symbol of audacity, a marriage of engineering courage and precise calculation. And yet, even in triumph, the lessons were sobering. The aircraft demanded respect. Pilots who had flown earlier prototypes spoke of moments when the Lightning seemed to fly itself, yet at other times threatened to twist violently under their control. It was clear, this machine would not forgive mistakes. It would not accommodate inexperience. Only skill, discipline, and a willingness to trust the impossible would allow men to harness its power. In this tension between danger and potential lay the heart of Johnson's vision. A plane that could dominate the sky, but only in the hands of those who understood it completely. By the end of 1939, the XP-38 had flown hundreds of test hours. It had broken speed records, demonstrated unprecedented climb rates, and shown that its long-range capabilities were not theoretical, but tangible. The doubters had fallen silent, replaced by a cautious awe. Lockheed executives, once fearful of bankruptcy, now saw a different future, a fighter that could operate over oceans, across continents, and above any existing threat. Johnson's audacity, his mad idea, had not only survived scrutiny but had proven itself in the most unforgiving laboratory imaginable: the sky itself. In the winter of 1939, as Johnson walked through the hangar, he touched the fuselage of the XP-38, feeling the vibration of the twin engines in its frame. Around him, mechanics and engineers worked quietly, adjusting rivets, testing controls, calibrating instruments. The plane looked ungainly, almost alien, yet every line, every bolt, every component was deliberate. It was a fighter born not of convention, but of vision, and in that vision lay the seed of a machine that would go on to change the course of World War II, executing missions that would become the stuff of legend. It was not just the design that made the Lightning extraordinary. It was the combination of audacity, precision, and the refusal to accept limits. The XP-38 had flown because one man had refused to listen to common sense, and the world of aerial combat would never be the same. Burbank, California, 1940. The XP-38 was no longer a prototype, but the foundation of an entirely new philosophy of aerial warfare. Lockheed's engineers, led by Kelly Johnson, had refined the design, resolving issues of compressibility, torque, and high-altitude performance. The twin-engine, twin-boom configuration remained controversial in military circles, but its potential was undeniable. The United States Army Air Corps had placed an initial order for the P-38 Lightning, a radical departure from conventional fighters, a long-range, high-speed, high-altitude interceptor capable of escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. The world beyond Lockheed's hangars was changing rapidly. Europe had descended into total war. France had fallen. Britain was under siege. Across the Pacific, Japan had expanded its influence, threatening American interests in China and the Philippines. While the US remained officially neutral, military planners understood that the next global conflict would demand aircraft capable of range, speed, and firepower previously unseen. The P-38, in its twin-engine majesty, embodied that preparation. The first production P-38 seconds rolled out of the Burbank factory in late 1940. American test pilots, trained initially on P-40 seconds and early pursuit aircraft, faced a steep learning curve. The Lightning was unlike anything they had flown. Its twin engines required careful coordination. The counter-rotating props demanded constant awareness of torque in takeoff and climb, and the aircraft's distinctive push-pull nose configuration changed visual cues for gunnery and landing. Yet in the air, the plane was poetry. Its Allison V-1710 engines, coupled with turbo superchargers, maintained full power at altitudes over 25,000 feet, leaving single-engine fighters gasping for oxygen. Its maximum speed of 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet was unmatched by any American aircraft in service. Despite its promise, early operations were fraught with challenges. The P-38's range and power were ideal for intercepting high-altitude bombers, but in low-altitude dogfights, the aircraft's size and mass were liabilities. Pilots reported sluggish roll rates and sensitive elevators that could bite back during tight maneuvers. In training squadrons across California, accidents were frequent. Landing mishaps, engine failures, and control lockouts in dives tested the nerve of even experienced pilots. Yet each mishap contributed to a growing knowledge base. Engineers iterated quickly, reinforcing the airframe, adjusting control surfaces, and fine-tuning the DARN turbo supercharger system. By early 1941, the P-38 was ready for its first operational deployments. The aircraft was sent to Alaska and the Caribbean, primarily for patrol and interception exercises, but the Pacific Theater would soon reveal the Lightning's true potential. The 7th of December 1941 changed everything. With the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered a global conflict. Suddenly, the P-38 was no longer a testbed for innovation. It was a weapon that needed to prove itself in combat. The early months of 1942 were a baptism by fire. The 1st and 14th Fighter Groups, equipped with the Lightning, were dispatched across the Pacific to defend the Philippines, Australia, and New Guinea. The distances involved in the theater demanded the very characteristics Johnson had baked into the design: range and endurance. Where single-engine fighters like the P-40 or early F-4F Wildcats could barely reach forward airstrips without refueling, the P-38 could escort bombers over hundreds of miles of open ocean, carrying extra fuel tanks under the wings without sacrificing performance. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Wurtsmith, commanding the 1st Fighter Group, recalled the first operational sorties over New Guinea. The Japanese thought they could outmaneuver us. They hadn't flown against something like this. We climbed to 15,000, then dove at them with guns blazing. It was like a hammer coming down from the sky. Wurtsmith's description would be echoed across the Pacific in the months to come. The twin 50 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon in the nose delivered concentrated firepower that destroyed aircraft in seconds, with accuracy that no fighter relying on wing-mounted guns could match. One early encounter, documented in 13 Fighter Command debriefing reports, from the 18th of April 1942, involved a flight of 8 P-38 seconds intercepting a Japanese reconnaissance formation near Lae, New Guinea. The Japanese 4th Air Group, flying Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by Zero fighters, expected an easy run. Within minutes, 2 Bettys were gone, disintegrating under the concentrated nose fire, while the remaining aircraft scattered. Japanese pilots later described the Lightning as a ghost that strikes from above, noting that the aircraft's speed and firepower were unmatched. P-38 pilots, meanwhile, quickly adapted their tactics. They discovered that altitude, dive speed, and sustained firepower rather than traditional dogfighting agility were the key to survival. Combat in the Pacific revealed a profound truth about the Lightning. It was a warplane designed not to mimic European fighters, but to dominate the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific theater. Its twin engines gave redundancy in the event of battle damage, a critical factor over open ocean, while its turbochargers maintained performance where Japanese aircraft faltered. Pilots who lost an engine could often limp back to base. Others returned, with airframes riddled with gunfire that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. The first kill stories of the P-38 were legendary. On the 12th of March, 1942, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, a young pilot from Wisconsin, flying a P-38F over New Guinea, engaged 4 A-6M-0s. Using altitude to gain speed, he dove on the enemy, firing the Lightning's nose guns. Within seconds, 2 Zeros exploded, a third spiraled out of control, and the fourth fled. Bong later described the experience with understated amazement. "It was like the plane had its own plan. I only had to point it." Bong's exploits would continue through the war, eventually making him the top American ace with 40 confirmed victories, a testament to both skill and the aircraft's inherent superiority. Meanwhile, Lockheed's engineers back in Burbank were already iterating. Combat experience fed new modifications. Improved cockpit visibility, better armor plating around the fuel tanks, and adjustments to propeller pitch for optimal acceleration in dives. Each innovation was grounded in primary historical sources and combat reports, ensuring that every change reflected real-world lessons learned in the heat of battle. The mad idea of 1937 was evolving into a machine whose potential was being proven in the skies over the Pacific. By late 1942, the P-38 had become more than a fighter. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and industrial power. Factories on the West Coast churned out aircraft in increasing numbers, while pilots trained intensively in formation flying, gunnery, and long-range navigation. The lessons of the early months' altitude, energy management, and concentrated firepower were codified into doctrine. Pilots understood that the P-38 was not a traditional dogfighter. It was a predator designed to exploit its strengths ruthlessly. In the span of 2 years, the Lightning had gone from a radical sketch labeled "mad" to the front line of America's fight across the Pacific. Its performance, its durability, and its concentrated firepower were unmatched, and it was about to face its greatest test, a mission that would forever etch the P-38 into history: Operation Vengeance, the targeted interception of Admiral Yamamoto. But before that moment arrived, the world of aerial combat had already been transformed. The P-38 had proven that one engineer's audacity, one mad idea, could create a weapon that redefined the art of war. The Lightning had survived its baptism. The Pacific skies had tested its limits, and it had emerged not merely intact, but dominant. And in the minds of the men who flew it, and the engineers who built it, the belief was unanimous. The P-38 was no longer an experiment. It was a legend in the making. The 18th of April, 1943. The tropical dawn over the Solomon Islands was unremarkable in appearance, but high above the islands, a storm of calculation and daring was taking shape. In a small room at Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron pored over intelligence reports that would define the next chapter of aerial warfare. Allied codebreakers had done what seemed impossible. They had intercepted and decrypted Japanese naval communications, revealing the exact itinerary of Admiral Yamamoto, the commander of the combined fleet and architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. The plan, known to history as Operation Vengeance, was audacious. To intercept Yamamoto's flight, American pilots would have to fly 400 miles over hostile terrain at low altitude to avoid radar detection, and engage the Admiral's escort in a fight where any mistake would be fatal. The aircraft chosen for the mission were P-38G Lightnings, the twin-engine twins of Kelly Johnson's radical design. The P-38's combination of speed, range, and concentrated nose fire made it uniquely suited for this type of long-distance interception. It could reach the target and still retain enough energy to climb, maneuver, and deliver a lethal burst before turning for home. The pilots, hand-picked for the mission, were among the best in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Major John W. Mitchell and Lieutenant Rex T. Barber led the flights, each aware that failure would mean death in the dense jungles of the Solomon Islands or in the open ocean beyond. The briefing was meticulous. Precise navigation over unfamiliar islands, altitude management, timing to intercept a moving target, and clear engagement protocols. The operation required absolute precision. The margin for error was negligible. At 7 hours, 6 P-38 seconds lifted off from Henderson Field. They climbed to 8,000 feet, hugging the contours of the jungle, maintaining radio silence to preserve the element of surprise. The Pacific was deceptively quiet. Below them, the islands seemed still, but the air was charged with tension. Every instrument reading, every cloud shadow, was scrutinized with hawk-like focus. The twin Allison engines purred with mechanical certainty, their turbo superchargers delivering sustained power as the aircraft carried them across hundreds of miles of water. 2 hours into the flight, the formation reached the interception point, a stretch of jungle and ocean where Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers, escorted by Zeros, were expected to appear. The pilots descended, weaving through low clouds to mask their approach. Intelligence had predicted the time of arrival to within minutes. The Japanese formation appeared almost on schedule, flying low to avoid radar and maximize speed. Yamamoto's aircraft were identifiable by size and markings, a luxury afforded by the intelligence provided from decrypted messages. The P-38 pilots moved into position. Lieutenant Rex Barber, flying his Lightning in the middle of the formation, felt the unique sensation the aircraft had earned its reputation for. The nose, bristling with 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, pointed as if it had a mind of its own. At exactly 9:35, the attack commenced. The Lightnings dove from slightly higher altitude, guns blazing. The concentrated firepower of the nose-mounted armament struck the Japanese bombers like a hammer, tearing through fuselage and wings. Explosions ripped through the leading Betty, sending it spiraling into the ocean. The Japanese escorts reacted instantly, but the Lightning's speed and twin-engine reliability allowed the Americans to engage and disengage with tactical precision. Major Mitchell's P-38 absorbed strafing fire with minimal damage. One engine took several rounds but continued delivering full power. By the time the first engagement concluded, Admiral Yamamoto's aircraft had been destroyed, along with his immediate escort. The mission, executed over less than 5 minutes of contact, had achieved its objective. Intelligence confirmed the identity of the downed aircraft through wreckage analysis and captured enemy reports. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead. Implications were immediate and profound. Operation Vengeance was not merely a tactical victory. It was a psychological blow to the Japanese Navy and a demonstration of American intelligence, planning, and technological superiority. The P-38 had proven itself in a role no other aircraft could have fulfilled. Its long-range endurance, precision gunnery, and survivability under fire had made a seemingly impossible mission possible. Post-mission debriefings, preserved in the 339th Fighter Squadron history and corroborated by 13 Fighter Command reports, highlighted several critical factors that ensured success. Navigation, normally prone to error over the Pacific, had been flawless thanks to meticulous planning and the P-38's stable handling. The nose-mounted guns allowed precise targeting without the convergence issues of wing-mounted armament, eliminating the need for dangerous deflection shooting. And crucially, the aircraft's twin engines provided redundancy, allowing pilots to absorb hits that would have grounded single-engine fighters instantly. Japanese post-war testimonies, collected by the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS, corroborated the scale of the disaster. Pilots who survived the attack described a formation of fast-moving American fighters, appearing suddenly, executing precise, deadly attacks before disappearing into clouds. One officer recalled, "It was as if they knew our exact position, moving like phantoms. There was no warning, only destruction." These accounts underscored the lethal combination of engineering brilliance and operational discipline that defined the P-38's capabilities. In the United States, the success of the mission was celebrated quietly but widely. The P-38's role in Operation Vengeance cemented its reputation as a strategic weapon. While dogfights over Guadalcanal and New Guinea had tested the aircraft's tactical capabilities, Yamamoto's interception demonstrated strategic potential. It was proof that American engineering could not only match the enemy, but redefine the scope of aerial operations. The mission also illuminated a key principle of American air combat doctrine. Technology, combined with training and intelligence, multiplies effectiveness. The pilot's skills, honed through thousands of hours of flight time and combat simulation, were enhanced by the P-38's design features: long range, concentrated firepower, high-altitude performance, and survivability. Alone, a skilled pilot in a conventional fighter could not have executed such a mission. Alone, the aircraft could not have succeeded without careful planning and timing. Together, they achieved what was previously inconceivable. Operation Vengeance also influenced subsequent tactics in both the Pacific and European theaters. Escort missions, long-range interception, and precision strikes became more viable as the principles demonstrated by the P-38's speed, altitude advantage, and concentrated firepower were applied elsewhere. Lessons learned were integrated into pilot training programs and operational planning, ensuring that the Lightning's impact would extend far beyond a single mission. By the end of 1943, the P-38 had evolved from an experimental twin-boom fighter into a symbol of American innovation and power. Its combat record, now including the high-profile elimination of Yamamoto, showcased its versatility. Pilots who had once struggled with the aircraft's quirks now relied on it implicitly, and enemy pilots learned to fear its distinctive silhouette in the skies. Japanese aircraft, agile but lightly armored, were vulnerable to the Lightning's concentrated nosefire, while the P-38's long range allowed missions that would have been impossible for other fighters. In retrospect, the Lightning's role in Operation Vengeance was a watershed moment in aerial warfare. It demonstrated that engineering audacity, operational planning, and intelligence integration could alter the course of war. A single mad idea, a radical twin-engine design by a young engineer named Kelly Johnson, had matured into a tool capable of striking at the very heart of an enemy's command. The P-38 had been tested in the crucible of the Pacific and had emerged not only intact but decisive, proving that in war, vision coupled with precision execution could achieve the extraordinary. The legacy of that day would echo throughout the war. Operation Vengeance was not simply a successful mission. It was the first proof in combat that the principles Kelly Johnson had pursued since 1937 range, firepower, and survivability could produce results beyond imagination. And it was only the beginning. The P-38 Lightning, once doubted and derided, was now a legend. Its baptism in the skies of the Pacific had begun a transformation that would make it one of the most feared and respected fighters of the Second World War. By the autumn of 1943, the P-38 Lightning had now proven itself in the jungles and islands of the Pacific, earning the respect and awe of both American and Japanese pilots. Yet the aircraft's journey was far from complete. While Guadalcanal and New Guinea had tested its endurance, firepower, and tactical flexibility, a new challenge loomed. The skies of Europe. The American war effort there demanded a different type of air supremacy long-range escort for the burgeoning daylight bombing campaign over Germany, France, and occupied territories. The P-38, designed initially as a high-speed interceptor, would now face the ultimate test of adaptability and doctrine. In England, September 1943, the 1st and 14th Air Forces began preparing their Lightning units for transcontinental operations over continental Europe. Major General Nathan Twining oversaw the integration of P-38 squadrons into the Strategic Bomber Escort framework, a role initially envisioned for the nimble P-51 Mustang, still in early production. The European theatre demanded a balance of endurance, speed, and concentrated firepower qualities the twin-boom fighter possessed in abundance. With drop tanks extending its operational range beyond 1,200 miles, the Lightning could accompany B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators deep into Reich territory, providing protection during the most vulnerable legs of their missions. The first deployment to England's airfields near Norfolk placed the P-38 against the Luftwaffe's veteran pilots, men who had honed their skills over France, Russia, and the Mediterranean. Encounters with Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds and Fokker-Wulf 190 seconds were immediate. Early missions in October 1943 revealed a familiar pattern. The Lightning could not outturn the agile German fighters at medium altitude, nor could it climb as rapidly in dogfights. But it had something they did not, a combination of firepower, durability, and energy retention that would redefine aerial tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Dick Bong, the Pacific's top ace, now assigned to train European squadrons, emphasized the principle that had kept his record intact. Energy equals survival. The P-38's twin Allison engines allowed it to convert altitude into dive speed, then into zoom climbs, a maneuver impossible for lighter single-engine fighters. Training focused on maintaining energy advantage, avoiding turning engagements, and concentrating fire with the Lightning's 8 nose-mounted guns. In practice, a single well-aimed burst could destroy a Bf-109 before it could respond. The difference between P-38 tactics and conventional dogfighting could not have been starker. Speed and firepower replaced maneuvering, while range and survivability allowed American pilots to take calculated risks that Germans could not match. The first large-scale European operation for P-38 seconds occurred on the 2nd of November 1943 over Rouen, France, escorting B-17 seconds en route to industrial targets in northern Germany. The mission highlighted both the aircraft's strengths and its vulnerabilities. At 20,000 feet, the Lightnings kept tight formations, using their superior speed to intercept Luftwaffe attacks before the bombers could be reached. Zeros had been replaced by experienced Bf-109 seconds and FW-190 seconds, and the initial skirmishes confirmed prior observations. The P-38 could absorb hits that would destroy lighter fighters and return home with engines smoking, wings holed, and fuselages perforated. Captain Thomas Maguire, leading one of the squadrons, described the sensation in his logbook. "We came upon a dozen Bf-109 seconds attempting to reach the bombers. I opened fire at 400 yards. The tracers converged, and in a matter of seconds, 3 aircraft disintegrated. The rest fled. It was as if our guns spoke louder than their tactics." Analysis of gun camera footage from these missions would later confirm that the concentrated firepower of the P-38's nose guns created a lethal convergence zone, making precision almost automatic. Unlike wing-mounted guns that required split-second deflection adjustments, the Lightning allowed pilots to aim as if the target were stationary, a revolutionary advantage in sustained air combat. But the European environment also exposed the aircraft's limits. The notoriously unpredictable English weather tested both airframe and pilot endurance. Extended missions in cold, turbulent air caused cockpit condensation, engine icing, and increased fatigue. Early production Lightnings, equipped with cockpit heaters of marginal effectiveness, required pilots to adapt rapidly to conditions that would have grounded other fighters. Maintenance crews, working under wartime constraints, learned to exploit the aircraft's modular design. Engines could be swapped in hours, and electrical systems, though complex, were designed with redundancy. These lessons became crucial as P-38 losses in combat proved that surviving return trips depended not only on pilot skill, but on operational resilience. November and December 1943 marked the P-38's transition from interceptor to strategic enabler. Lightning squadrons increasingly escorted formations of B-17 seconds to Berlin, Leipzig, and other industrial centers, encountering both seasoned Luftwaffe aces and newly minted pilots pressed into combat. The engagements followed a consistent pattern. German pilots, accustomed to exploiting turning and climbing advantages, found themselves outgunned and outpaced. The P-38 seconds would initiate attacks from higher altitude, unleash concentrated bursts on enemy fighters attempting to reach the bombers, then climb back to safety with minimal exposure. Losses were surprisingly low, especially compared to other fighter types in the same theater. This period also revealed the P-38's psychological impact on the Luftwaffe. German pilots began referring to the twin-boom fighter as the fork-tailed devil, an acknowledgement of its speed, power, and lethality. The concentrated 50 caliber and 20 mm battery forced Luftwaffe instructors to revise training manuals. Even highly experienced pilots, some veterans of North Africa and the Eastern Front, reported feelings of unease when engaging lightnings. "They don't turn, they just fire and vanish," one post-war interrogation recorded. "It's as if you're fighting a ghost with guns." These psychological effects would magnify the tactical advantages, often causing hesitation or overcorrection in combat, further reducing Luftwaffe effectiveness. At the same time, American engineers continued to refine the Lightning. The P-38J variant, introduced in mid-1943, featured improved turbochargers, intercoolers, and engine management systems, allowing sustained high-altitude performance in the frigid European skies. External drop tanks, initially a compromise, became standard, extending operational reach without significantly impacting speed or maneuverability. Armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, already formidable, were enhanced in response to combat damage reports, making the Lightning increasingly survivable under heavy fire. Each iteration reflected lessons learned directly from combat, a testament to the feedback loop between pilots, engineers, and strategists that had become a hallmark of American air power. By the end of 1943, the P-38 Lightning had evolved from a Pacific theater predator into a European escort juggernaut. Its combination of firepower, range, durability, and tactical flexibility allowed it to redefine the concept of fighter escort. Strategic bombing missions that had once been high-risk gambles now benefited from the presence of an aircraft capable of both protecting bombers and engaging enemy fighters decisively. In the broader context, the Lightning exemplified how innovative engineering, combined with rigorous pilot training and careful operational planning, could produce an airframe whose influence extended beyond individual missions, shaping the very doctrine of air combat. By January 1944, the P-38's reputation was firmly established. Luftwaffe pilots now approached encounters with a wary respect bordering on fear, while American pilots had internalized a simple truth. The twin-boom fighter did not merely participate in combat, it dictated the terms of engagement. From the jungles of New Guinea to the skies over Rouen and Berlin, the P-38 had proven that one engineer's mad idea could not only survive but dominate, leaving an indelible mark on the conduct of the war. By early 1944, the P-38 Lightning had transcended the role of a high-speed interceptor to become a symbol of American air power in both the Pacific and European theaters. Its operational philosophy, survivability, concentrated firepower, and energy retention was no longer experimental. It had matured into a tactical doctrine. The twin-boom fighter was now more than a machine. It was a weapon that reshaped aerial warfare and defined the U.S. Army Air Force's approach to air supremacy. In the European theater, the ramp-up to Operation Overlord placed unprecedented demands on escort aircraft. B-17 and B-24 formations were poised to strike deep into German heartlands, where flak, fighters, and logistical hazards created a crucible for American pilots. The P-38, particularly the improved P-38J and early P-38 Liters variants, became central to this effort. Equipped with drop tanks extending range to over 1,200 miles, the Lightning could escort bombers from East Anglia to industrial targets in the Ruhr and back, providing continuous top cover and unprecedented capability at the time. Early Overlord reconnaissance missions in April 1944 demonstrated the P-38's effectiveness in establishing air dominance. Squadron reports highlight a recurring pattern. Lightnings positioned above incoming Luftwaffe formations, maintaining altitude advantage while remaining out of effective cannon range. Once the enemy attempted to reach the bombers, P-38 pilots would initiate a controlled dive attack sequence, unleashing concentrated, 50 caliber fire from nose-mounted guns. The results were catastrophic for German pilots. Flight logs from the 339th Fighter Squadron recorded instances where multiple Bf-109 seconds were destroyed within seconds, the aircraft literally disintegrating under sustained bursts. Post-mission analyses revealed the unique lethality of the Lightning's convergence zone, where all 8 guns could intersect at 300-400 yards, creating a near-guaranteed kill if properly aimed. The doctrine that emerged was deceptively simple. Energy first, firepower second, maneuver last. Unlike traditional dogfighting tactics that relied on turning agility or climbing advantage, P-38 engagements emphasized the controlled application of kinetic energy and deliberate firing. Pilots were trained to climb to superior altitude, dive to generate speed, engage the enemy with a short, concentrated burst, then zoom climb back to safety. This sequence exploited the Lightning's twin engines, heavy armament, and rugged airframe, while minimizing exposure to flak or counterattack. In the Pacific, the P-38M and L variants were performing equally transformative roles. By mid-1944, Colonel Richard E. Dick Johnson led the 475th Fighter Group in New Guinea and the Philippines, pioneering tactics that exploited the Lightning's range and versatility. Japanese fighters, accustomed to engaging lighter, more agile U.S. aircraft like the P-40 or early P-39 seconds, were ill-prepared for the twin-boom Predator. Captain Charles MacDonald, an ace credited with 27 kills, described the effect in post-war interviews. "They could not turn with us, they could not outclimb us. Our guns spoke, and their aircraft ceased to exist. It was as if the sky belonged to us, and every burst was a judge's hammer." Yet the Lightning's story was not merely about aerial victories. Its firepower, armor, and versatility transformed it into a ground attack platform of devastating efficiency. The P-38 could carry bombs ranging from 500 to 1,000 pounds, or a combination of high-velocity rockets, delivering pinpoint strikes against Japanese and German infrastructure alike. In the Pacific, rail yards, convoys, and airfields fell to concentrated Lightning attacks. In Europe, the aircraft's precision made it ideal for interdiction missions against supply columns and armored units, undermining German operational mobility in advance of the D-Day landings. One of the defining lessons of 1944 was the integration of firepower with psychological impact. German and Japanese pilots alike began to regard the Lightning with an almost superstitious respect. In post-war interrogations, Luftwaffe officers described the P-38 as a fork-tailed demon capable of destroying aircraft with impunity. Japanese veterans of the 4th Air Group, engaged over New Guinea, recalled that even a brief encounter with Lightnings would often scatter formations, reducing their effectiveness before any shots were fired. In both theaters, the aircraft was not only a tactical instrument but a force multiplier, projecting fear and chaos across enemy ranks. The operational record during late 1944 to early 1945 underscored this impact. In Europe, Lightnings contributed to over 400 confirmed Luftwaffe kills, while simultaneously escorting thousands of bombers to industrial targets. Bombing raids in the Ruhr, Frankfurt, and the Rhineland benefited from the Lightning's dual capability as both protector and striker. In the Pacific, combined arms operations saw Lightnings destroy hundreds of aircraft on the ground, sink supply vessels, and neutralize artillery positions ahead of amphibious landings. The dual success in separate theaters demonstrated that the P-38 was not a niche fighter, it was a globally relevant instrument of air power. Particularly significant was the P-38's adaptability in confronting the emergent threat of jet aircraft. While jets like the Me-262 introduced unprecedented speed, the Lightning exploited the limitations of early turbojet engines, vulnerability during takeoff and landing, limited maneuverability at high angles of attack, and restricted fuel endurance. Lightning pilots, operating under meticulously developed tactics, intercepted jets by leveraging speed dives and energy retention, forcing engagements where the jets could not respond effectively. One notable engagement in March 1945 involved Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, who recorded a jet kill at high altitude, proving the P-38's continued relevance even in the era of early jet fighters. By mid-1945, as the European conflict drew to a close and the Pacific War reached its climax, the P-38's influence was evident in every aspect of Allied air operations. Its twin-engine design had proven survivable, its firepower decisive, and its range strategic. The aircraft had become an instrument of both attrition and precision, capable of executing escort, interception, and ground attack missions with equal competence. Furthermore, the experience and training invested in P-38 pilots magnified its effectiveness, producing aviators who could exploit every nuance of the aircraft's capabilities. In retrospect, the P-38 Lightning exemplified how engineering audacity, tactical innovation, and industrial capacity could converge to redefine air combat. One young engineer's mad sketch from 1937, initially dismissed as impossible, had matured into an aircraft capable of dictating the terms of battle across two oceans. Its service record, stretching from Guadalcanal to Berlin, from Leyte Gulf to Okinawa, demonstrated that a carefully designed combination of firepower, energy retention, survivability, and range could decisively overcome even the most skilled adversaries. Ultimately, the P-38 was more than a machine, it was a doctrine in metal and fuel, a testament to American ingenuity and industrial power. As Major General Nathan Twining later reflected in post-war interviews, the P-38 did not merely participate in air combat, it dictated its terms. It proved that in war, innovation paired with production could achieve results that pure skill alone could not. By the spring of 1945, the Lightning had flown its final missions over both Europe and the Pacific, leaving behind a legacy unmatched by any contemporary fighter. Its combination of firepower, range, and durability had changed the calculus of air warfare forever, transforming what had once been an audacious, mad idea into a cornerstone of aerial supremacy. By the summer of 1945, the war was over, but the P-38 Lightning's shadow loomed long over aviation history. Across the Pacific Islands and European airfields, the twin-boom fighter had demonstrated a doctrine that would influence both tactical and strategic thinking for decades. Survivability, concentrated firepower, and operational reach could outweigh sheer maneuverability. Pilots who had flown against Spitfires, Zeros, and Messerschmitts now spoke of the Lightning with reverence, recalling how it allowed them to dictate engagements, survive punishment that would have destroyed lesser aircraft, and strike targets with devastating precision. The post-war period revealed that the P-38's design philosophy had shaped future fighter development. The twin-engine layout, central nacelle housing, nose armament, and emphasis on energy retention informed jet designs, particularly in long-range escort and strike aircraft. Lessons from the Lightning's firepower convergence, 8 guns aligned to maximize probability of kill, would be studied and adapted in gun and missile systems for decades. The U.S. Air Force's evaluation reports, preserved in the National Archives and Air Force Historical Research Agency, emphasized that P-38 pilots had been trained to integrate tactics with aircraft capabilities in a way that ensured overwhelming effectiveness, setting a standard for modern air combat training. Beyond technical influence, the Lightning represented a paradigm of American industrial power. Lockheed's wartime production, accelerated to nearly 10 aircraft per day at peak output, demonstrated that complexity need not impede mass manufacture when supported by organized labor, precise logistics, and robust supply chains. Post-war analyses by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey and congressional studies highlighted how the P-38's combination of engineering audacity and mass production contributed to Allied air dominance, not through a single aircraft or pilot, but through systemic advantage. Veterans reunions, such as the 1985 Pacific Theater gathering in Hawaii, preserved first-hand testimonies. Pilots described how the Lightning's range and firepower had made missions feasible that would have been suicidal in other fighters. Japanese officers, captured and later interrogated, acknowledged the psychological and tactical impact of the P-38. They noted that, by the final months of the war, American pilots consistently arrived with sufficient fuel, concentrated ammunition, and tactical clarity, a combination that neutralized even experienced Japanese and German aces. By the late 1942, the P-38 had been largely retired from frontline service, replaced by jet-powered fighters. Yet its influence persisted. Lessons in aerodynamic innovation, energy tactics, and industrial integration informed the design of aircraft such as the F-82 Twin Mustang, the F-84 Thunderjet, and later long-range fighter bombers. Military historians concluded that the Lightning's legacy was not merely its kill count over 1,800 enemy aircraft destroyed in its operational lifetime, but the enduring principles of air combat it codified. The twin-boom Demon, once derided as an impossible mad design, had redefined expectations for speed, range, firepower, and survivability. Its story remains a testament to the synergy of visionary engineering, tactical innovation, and industrial capacity. The P-38 did not merely win battles, it shaped the very doctrine of air power that would guide the U.S. Air Force into the jet age and beyond, ensuring that one engineer's audacious sketch would echo through the history of warfare for generations. By the 1960 seconds, the P-38 Lightning had transitioned from a frontline weapon to a symbol, immortalized in museums, books, and veterans' recollections. The once radical twin-boom design, which had been dismissed as Kelly Johnson's madness in 1937, had become a touchstone for aviation ingenuity. Retired pilots, engineers, and historians began to assemble not just the technical record, but the human stories that defined the aircraft's operational life. At Lockheed's Burbank facility, Johnson and his colleagues reflected on their creation with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The XP-38 prototype, which had flown for the first time in January 1939 under skeptical eyes, had evolved into a machine that dominated both the Pacific and European theaters. Johnson himself recounted in interviews during the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium how every decision from the turbo superchargers to the counter-rotating propellers was guided by a single principle: maximize survivability while delivering overwhelming firepower. Engineers who had once criticized the design marveled at the aircraft's record: 1,800-plus aerial victories, thousands of ground targets destroyed, and a psychological impact on enemy pilots that could not be quantified. Veterans reunions throughout the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, most notably the 1985 Pacific Theater gathering in Hawaii, offered first-hand testimony of the Lightning's enduring legend. Pilots recounted how the aircraft allowed them to engage numerically superior enemy formations with confidence, leveraging its range to strike at the heart of Japanese positions and its concentrated nose armament to deliver destruction with surgical precision. Former Japanese pilots, present at post-war symposiums and captured in interrogation reports, reflected on the terror inspired by the P-38. They described the twin-boom Demon as a machine that defied conventional tactics, surviving hits that would have destroyed any Zero or Key 61, and punishing those who miscalculated its approach. The aircraft's story was not confined to combat alone. Its presence in post-war aviation culture influenced both civilian and military aeronautical design. Flight schools used the P-38 to train a new generation of pilots in energy management, gunnery, and long-range navigation. Museums, including the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, displayed restored Lightnings alongside contemporary jet aircraft, emphasizing the Lightning's role as a bridge between piston engine dominance and the jet age. Even decades after the war, the P-38 remained a measure of American industrial and engineering philosophy. Lockheed's ability to produce thousands of these complex machines, train tens of thousands of pilots, and sustain a global supply chain during wartime, epitomized the overwhelming material superiority that historians often cite as a decisive factor in Allied victory. As veterans aged and engineers retired, the Lightning's legacy became less about individual exploits and more about a shared ethos of innovation, adaptability, and relentless pursuit of excellence. By 1985, when surviving pilots, engineers, and even former adversaries gathered in Phoenix, Arizona, the P-38's reputation had crystallized. Former Japanese and American aviators alike acknowledged the truth. This was not merely a plane, but a revolution in air combat, one conceived in a moment of audacious vision and realized through unparalleled technical skill. The laughter that greeted its first flight had long since faded, replaced by respect, awe, and enduring mythos. When the guns fell silent over the Pacific in August 1945, and the remaining Lightnings were ferried to depots, museums, and scrapyards, it would have been easy to think the P-38 Lightning had completed its mission and faded into history. Yet, for aviators, engineers, and historians alike, the aircraft represented far more than a weapon. It was a manifestation of American ingenuity, industrial might, and wartime philosophy. Its legacy did not vanish with the surrender of Japan, it evolved, influencing tactics, technology, and the very culture of air combat for decades to come. The first and most obvious legacy of the Lightning lay in its engineering innovations. Every element of the twin-boom design, the turbo-supercharged Allison engines, counter-rotating propellers, tricycle landing gear, and centralized nose armament became a reference point for designers seeking to balance speed, firepower, and survivability. Engineers in post-war Lockheed projects, from the F-104 Starfighter to the U-2 spy plane, openly cited Kelly Johnson's early experiments on the XP-38 as inspiration for daring approaches to high-speed, high-altitude flight. The P-38 had proven that radical design, when paired with meticulous engineering and rigorous testing, could create performance previously considered impossible. Lessons learned in vibration analysis, cooling management, and structural load distribution were applied not only in fighter aircraft but also in civilian aviation, pushing the boundaries of what airframes could achieve. Tactically, the Lightning reshaped the very principles of air combat. During the war, the P-38 forced both Japanese and German pilots to reconsider standard dogfighting doctrine. Its combination of long range, high speed in dives, and concentrated firepower meant that traditional turn and climb maneuvers were often suicidal against well-trained Lightning pilots. Post-war military theorists studied P-38 combat reports to develop the concept of energy management, which became a foundational element in jet-era air combat training. Pilots learned that speed, altitude, and situational awareness could often trump maneuverability, a principle that informed the development of jet fighters, such as the F-86, Sabre, F-4 Phantom, and later, multi-role aircraft like the F-15 Eagle. The Lightning had demonstrated that air combat was not merely a contest of reflexes, but a mathematical exercise in energy and firepower. The psychological effect of the P-38 extended beyond the battlefield. Japanese pilots, long accustomed to the nimble Zero, spoke in post-war interviews of the fear and respect the Lightning inspired. Allied pilots, in turn, carried with them a heightened understanding of morale's importance. The Lightning's ability to absorb damage and still return pilots safely instilled confidence in its operators, reinforcing the principle that survivable aircraft contribute directly to operational effectiveness. The psychological impact was codified in post-war training manuals, with instructors emphasizing confidence and trust, and in machinery as much as tactical skill. This lesson was carried into the jet age, where aircraft like the F-4 and F-14 were designed with redundancy, armor, and reliability as central priorities. Operationally, the P-38 set a precedent for multi-role versatility. While initially conceived as a high-altitude interceptor, it evolved into a long-range bomber escort, reconnaissance platform, and ground attack aircraft. This adaptability influenced the design philosophy of later American aircraft, from the F-111 Aardvark to the F-15E Strike Eagle. The Lightning proved that engineering flexibility could translate directly into battlefield dominance, and that aircraft capable of performing multiple missions reduced the logistical and tactical constraints that had traditionally hampered air operations. Culturally, the Lightning's impact persisted in ways both tangible and symbolic. Veterans' reunions, museum exhibits, and aviation literature immortalized its image. The sleek twin booms, the central nacelle, the roar of the Allison engines, and the lethal accuracy of its nose armament. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's P-38D, restored with painstaking attention to detail, became a focal point for public education, illustrating not only the aircraft's specifications but also the human ingenuity behind its creation. Oral histories and combat footage preserved the pilot's experiences, ensuring that the stories of survival, heroism, and innovation remained accessible to new generations. The Lightning entered the collective consciousness of military aviation as a symbol of how vision, engineering skill, and industrial power could converge to shape the course of history. Finally, the P-38 serves as a case study in the broader context of American wartime philosophy. Unlike many European designs, which emphasized incremental technical superiority, the Lightning reflected a holistic approach: overwhelming material superiority, rigorous pilot training, and continuous tactical innovation.